Okay.
Cool. So, all right, cool. Here we go. So this is a Voice of San Diego at home. This is our live stream series that we started when we realized we couldn't go anywhere. Originally, we were going to do this on Instagram Live. That's usually where we host these on Fridays. But because of technological reasons, now we're here. We're on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and all that good stuff. So I'm Nate John with Voice of San Diego. We're talking today with Ashley McGlone. Our deal is for the Fridays for Voice of San Diego at home is we have a reporter come on and tell us a story that they've been focusing on for the week. And just a little bit about Voice of San Diego. If you are still getting to know us, we are a nonprofit member-based news organization. Most of our work focuses on investigative journalism, explanatory journalism. Ashley's really good at doing both of those things. She's had a lot of really great stories over the years here at Voice of San Diego. So yeah, here we are. So Ashley, for this live stream, obviously I was with you, and I was thinking about how I see you more now than I did when we could hang out together. Because you're not based in San Diego, right?
That's correct. Yeah, I actually live a little further north, and also I've only been back part-time since I had a baby 19 months ago. So I'm not face-to-face as often, but trying to stay productive. And yeah, so I actually get to see you all daily way more now that the pandemic is here, which is weird.
Yeah, I know your face a lot better than I used to, which is nice. So are you in Orange County?
Orange County, South Orange County, yep. And I know almost—
and there's a Voice of Orange County there.
There is. They're a little bit of a smaller operation, a little bit newer than us. And yeah, again, I still find that they're doing good work, and they've actually had some impact here as well. But Orange County, in my mind, is still such a news desert compared to San Diego and LA. It's like we're this like in no man's land in between, and it's really tough to have get information. And there are, you know, some reporters from the Register, and even the Times kind of pays attention. But like local TV, we're all kind of like a suburb of Los Angeles, and that's not really true. So it's tricky.
Yeah,
I definitely know more about San Diego than I do here sometimes.
Yeah, that's the thing I was thinking about. You for this story that we're going to talk about, you talked with mayors and like elected officials from a whole bunch of cities in the county and the region of San Diego, and you know so much about San Diego, but you don't. So do you know more about San Diego than the place that you live?
For sure. And the place I grew up, because I grew up in Orange County too. So it's a lot. But even because things are changing so quickly, like just keeping up with what's happening in San Diego is like enough on my plate. And then again, the baby and everything. And
totally, yeah.
Toddler now, that like trying to learn and then keep up with Orange County is like too much. So I really don't even know what's happening outside my door, but I know more about San Diego. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because it's decently complicated. Pay attention to. So yeah, Fridays we have a reporter come on, tell us a story that they've been working on. So this is essentially what we're going to be doing for today. So a lot of people right now, Ashley, they're waiting for money from the government in a lot of different ways. Some people are relying on that $1,200 check that's supposed to come from the government or more based on your family situation. Unemployment checks are coming, or they're backlogged, or a lot of people are just trying to get that unemployment payout if they've lost their jobs or jobs were affected. There's small businesses that are applying for loans, for like payroll loans, things like that, that'll come from the government. But this week you were focusing on money that's different from all that. So what was the money that you were focusing on for your story this week?
So Lisa Halverstadt and I sort of zeroed in on the federal stimulus package known as the CARES Act, and specifically the piece of the CARES Act that was trickling down directly to local cities and county governments, and specifically San Diego County, those who got cut like a check based on just the size of their population to help respond to this crisis and deal with the impact of the crisis. So that's sort of the piece that we really looked at. And what we actually found was only the county of San Diego and the city of San Diego got those big checks and infusions dropped in their bank account, sort of no questions asked at this point, for them to be able to mobilize and do what they need to do to deal with this crisis. And the city of San Diego got $248 million for its like $1.4 million population. And the county got $334 million for the county's population minus the city of San Diego. But those other 17 cities across the county, from Oceanside all the way down to Imperial Beach, did not get that. They are eligible.
Do you recall offhand the population difference? So like for the county of San Diego minus the city, do you know how that shakes out? Because those other cities are so small in comparison to San Diego.
Right. I know. I think like I don't have it in front of me, but like nobody is near that. Like there was nobody near the 500,000 cutoff for people. Like, no one was like 449,000 or something. But I want to say, like Chula Vista is really big and they didn't get a cut. And they're like, and the South Bays in particular getting hit quite hard. So they I think are like they would have been the next in line. And again, they're hoping for more money that's coming directly to them, although we don't know if another federal stimulus package will do that for them. But yeah, they're not close to the 500,000, and the county population. I'd have to pull the numbers again. I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me.
No worries. So that's curious though, because the threshold for a city population to get federal funding from the CARES Act is 500,000. You said.
Yeah, that's what we found. Yeah, they did that kind of firm cutoff, and so. The smaller cities are eligible for certain like FEMA reimbursements after the fact. They also will get some like more allocated like restricted dollars. So for instance, the city of Oceanside, which is also fairly big, they got a $30,000 check for their airport, but like not any general aid right out the gate. They're hoping that they're also going to get like $800,000 tied to like their lower income populations, but that also is through something called the CDBG block grant process through the state, and they've got to do paperwork and jump through some hoops. So it's a very different process than what the county and the city are dealing with right now.
Either way, that's not like right now, because you said, the city of San Diego, they had the money just dropped into their account, like a lot of the people who are getting that $1,200 check for individuals or for families. I remember, so Scott Lewis was interviewing Kevin Faulconer when he broke that news, and we were talking about like the CARES Act and when that money was coming in. And this was 2-3 weeks ago, and Mayor Faulconer said, "Oh yeah, it's in the bank right now," and that was kind of surprising. And this week on the Voice of San Diego podcast, one of our Keats was speaking to City Councilman Chris, and the thing that he said that stuck out to me the most was he says that it seems possible and potentially unlikely that the city could spend all $248 million by the end of the calendar year. So like there's this crazy situation where there's a difference in the city of San Diego not sure it can spend all of its money, but then all the cities and all the people that you spoke to at least want a part of that. So who are some of the folks you spoke to for the story?
So Lisa and I sort of tag teamed and grabbed a handful of cities across town that we either had kind of heard were struggling or we knew had reached out to the county for help. And so what's something that you said that I want to talk about real quick is that the CARES Act money as it stands is not allowed to be directly used to backfill revenue losses. So cities across town have been hit with these crazy revenue losses for sales tax revenues that have just plummeted, tourism taxes that have just plummeted. And that's the money that really filled their coffers every year to provide what they do. And that includes essential services, sometimes like fire departments and police departments and sewer and water services. So like I talked to Escondido and they have their own fire, sewer, water, and they're trying to figure things out, but they haven't got that money. So associations that are working on behalf of cities that got left out of that sort of big bulk check and even direct support in that way are advocating for not only more money, but also more flexibility in how they can spend it. Because I want to say it was Jeffrey Epp out of Escondido who kind of had a good analogy of like, so there's the immediate emergency costs, right, which are causing their costs to go up. They're paramedics. If they have a paramedic team, they need protective equipment. They need hand sanitizer. They need Clorox wipes. They've got all these immediate things that they need to address. Some cities are also going to eventually get money to house the homeless during this crisis. But it's not just that. It's not just those direct costs. It's these longer term revenue losses that they don't know how they're going to pay for just the regular stuff anymore. And so he's like, anyone that says that cities don't, they don't have, $10 million in new costs, so they don't need this extra federal money or something. He's like, the businesses like the barbershop down the street that no longer has that revenue, the barbershop isn't getting support because he now has all these new costs. He just doesn't have revenue.
Right.
And so that money is going to him to kind of support. And cities in a lot of ways are in the same boat. And so I thought that was a really good analogy as to why there's the direct costs up front, and then there's these revenue losses that are going to really manifest. And they're trying to figure out, for the budget next year, what to do and how to obviously project the unknown is like, when is this going to end? How deep?
It's the craziest budget cycle anyone's going to deal with.
Everyone's just like thrown for a loop, obviously, as is the world. But to be in government and responsible for essential services at a time like this is tough. And especially for these cities that didn't get that big check in the mail, they're just feeling a little left out and looking maybe to the county to get a slice. But the county, so the U.S. Treasury rules allow the county to give out some of their money to these other cities, but they're not required to.
Right.
Yeah, so it's interesting.
I was wondering about that process. So real quick, for anyone watching right now, if you have a question for Ashley about the story that she did, and smaller cities in the region of San Diego trying to make sure they have enough money to make it through the pandemic, you can drop those questions in the comments and we can try to get to those if we can. So Ashley, what's the process? Because we have 17 cities that you said that you covered for this story, more or less. In the region that are smaller than San Diego, trying to get funding to make sure that they can provide all the essential services that they give their residents. Things like, I guess it would be like police, like emergency medical services, things like that. So say, for example, like the city of Oceanside, if they wanted to appeal to the Board of Super or the county, how does anyone know how that works yet?
So we know some cities have already begun reaching out to the county, kind of through back channels and saying, hey, you guys got that $334 million. Do you guys plan to spend it all? And again, it's interesting because the county is in a unique position in a lot of ways. They're quarterbacking the region's response. They're the ones putting out these public health orders in addition to the federal and state.
Which is like their standard role. Like that's what they're supposed to be doing.
For sure. And then they have their own sort of regional response efforts and shelters and things. But they, as of yet, they have not, doled out individual allotments to different cities. And again, they aren't required to. But like the city of Imperial Beach is one of, I think, 9 cities that relies on the county sheriff's department to provide their law enforcement. And apparently unrelated to the pandemic, they're anticipating like a cost increase in their contract, and they're strapped, and they've had to increase costs, like increased enforcement, like Oceanside at the beach, both interpreting public health orders and then trying to enforce public health orders to, parks and beaches and things to help the public know what's okay. But they asked for a reprieve from that. And then we're basically told by the county no. And then they said, well, can you guys use some of your CARES Act money to pay for that increase and kind of give us a break? And they were told no. So that's, again, like a weird, unrelated pandemic thing. But at the same time, because they're strapped, they're looking for any help the county can give. We know a financial officer for the county gave the Board of Supervisors a presentation this week that laid out sort of several options of how they could potentially spend this money. It included obviously the
that's what I was wondering about.
It's like ramped up testing, all kinds of stuff, but included was like for whatever reason, the number that they put out there was $100 million, that you could maybe give out up to $100 million of your dollars to these smaller cities that didn't get the aid, but it wasn't a formal proposal. And the other funny thing to note here is that of all the options that were presented, the county can't do them all, because if you add them all up, it would be like 200 million beyond what they received. It was,
So it's not so much like a slice of the pie thing. Like, this is what you can do with what you have. It's like, these are the options and kind of the tiers that you can choose from, but choose wisely, because you could go over, and then
you could go over by a lot. Like, you guys cannot do all of this. And so this is something you can consider, but we're not suggesting it. We're not proposing it. We're not even asking you to vote on it. And as far as we could tell, Lisa tuned into the meeting, but the supervisors didn't even talk about it and didn't weigh in on it. So we don't know if they're really even interested in sharing. We just know that local cities are asking and hoping and wondering. But as of, a couple of days ago when we had last checked in, had not heard, yes, okay, Oceanside, you're going to get this amount, or Imperial Beach, you're going to get this amount, whether it's specific to increased enforcement at the beach or testing, or Chula Vista wants funds because they've had to increase police services around testing sites that the county has in their town. So anyway, there's a lot. I'm rambling a little bit, but there's a lot to cover here.
So have you, so there's like, right now it sounds like there's no sense from the county how they may want to use those federal dollars.
We know, like, up front, they have increased costs. They have this new dashboard where they're tracking tests. They're trying to coordinate efforts with all these hospitals across the region.
Right, yeah, sure.
They've secured a hotel and motel rooms for people that are vulnerable, homeless, and need shelter, or those that have a doctor's order and need a place to shelter away from vulnerable family members. So they do have these extra costs out of pocket that we know that they're going to use those dollars for to some extent. I want to say their monthly tab has risen from like $7 million a month to $14 million a month. So they're spending, no joke, and they're trying to ramp up things like contact tracing and increasing staff for that, increasing their lab test capacity. So they certainly have their own costs.
Yeah.
Whether they're interested in sharing any of the wealth with the other cities, especially if those other cities don't get any other aid, remains to be seen. So.
Yeah. So like we were saying before, for the city of San Diego, one of the councilmen, Chris Kay, said that he's not sure whether they can spend all $248 million that they got from the CARES Act. Do you get the sense from the county that they should have no issue spending all the money that they got?
I think there is a ton of flexibility and leeway. I mean, the county could certainly find, clearly the presentation already found 200 million more that they could hypothetically spend the money on than what they received. And so, because it also can be used on like propping up businesses in loans or grants. So, we all know people are hurting, there's unemployment lines out the door. So there's definitely need, and there is a lot of discretion in how the government can spend it. But it will be up to county supervisors to determine how they want to spend it. But yeah, I guess if they don't spend it, and it has to be, under the rules, there isn't that flexibility for backfilling revenues, but there's a ton of other needs that have risen. If they don't spend it by December 30th, it hypothetically needs to go back to the Treasury Department. But personally, I don't think, especially with all these other cities, if the county somehow comes up 100 million short, well, 17 cities across the county say they can meet that need, and they have no problem spending it.
And that could end up being like a strange race among regional cities of trying to get those dollars for all the things that they need.
For sure. Yeah, that's the question, right? Like, is there going to be even a competitive process? Is it going to be purely left up to each supervisor? Are they going to divvy it up and they get to choose, kind of like they have these like neighborhood grants that they have? Will it be like that? Will there be a more formal process? Who knows? We're definitely going to be paying attention to it because it's very curious. And we also know, like I said, some associations are lobbying state officials, and people are asking the state to give up some more of their money directly to cities. But Newsom has said, nah, I'm not really able to help everybody. We have our own, multi-billion-dollar deficit that we're now facing. So kind of don't hold your breath. And then the feds, there's some signs from the feds, certain politicians that don't want to just give those immediate checks. And I know that some city officials heard comments from Mitch McConnell talking about, well, they can just go bankrupt, if they need to, that he's not interested in backfilling them in any way. So they're concerned. Some officials still have hope, though, that again, another round of stimulus is coming and they'll get the help that they desperately need. So
did you by spoke to anyone from Lemon Grove in your?
I personally didn't. Bella Ross did for us, and she had followed their financial trouble before all this, and they had that.
Yeah, she was on it ahead of time.
They had tried to put a sales tax revenue item up to voters, and I want to say that was shot down, right? And so they're in a real pinch right now. They were already kind of on the margins, and this is definitely not helping. I think they're looking at draining whatever cushion reserve that they had very quickly, much more quicker than they had. I think it was like a 5-year period that's dropped to like a 2-year period. I have to double check, but it's not good. I think a lot of governments, like the county, to some extent, is fortunate and able to mobilize and respond even before these dollars landed in their bank, because they had a really big, healthy reserve. So governments that didn't do that during the good years, are going to have a harder time navigating this, especially if they don't get that other support.
Right. Which kind of speaks to like the interesting wide reach of powers that the Board of Supervisors has, because if the city of Lemon Grove becomes like financially insolvent, you tell me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand, then the county Board of Supervisors kind of takes over management of that city, sort of like an unincorporated area.
I'd have to follow up on kind of, the next step. I know that the sales tax measure that was pitched was like, this could save us from like a takeover.
Mm-hmm.
I think, if I recall the coverage, it was like it maybe would get just reabsorbed into the county and basically become an unincorporated part of the county again versus like an actual standalone city. And that would just get like disbanded and absorbed. So I think they're in a precarious position 100%. And to your point, I mean, if county supervisors now have the leeway to give them aid that's related to the virus, but also potentially could take them over if they don't. I don't know if they're like that close to the edge. I think they said that they've got a couple more years that they can kind of struggle through. But it's definitely something that they're monitoring for sure.
Yeah. And there's always November for another ballot measure in case people feel like being taxed more in the middle of, this situation.
It's funny you say that because the city manager for Escondido, they had been studying a 1 cent sales tax measure before all this. And he's like, oh yeah, we're going to still.
Like they were preparing for one for the November ballot?
They were studying it, yeah. And so he says, hey, as staff, we're 100% going to recommend the council vote to put this on the ballot in, this November. And I was like, really? Are you concerned that people, everyone's suffering, that they just don't want to pay more taxes on top of everything else right now? And he's like, you know what? I think he wasn't concerned about that for what it's worth. And he just said, now more than ever, we need these dollars. And so hopefully they can get that message across to their residents and they'll get the support they need. The time will tell if come November, the sentiment is okay, yes, I need to throw my support. 1 cent isn't that much or whatever. Or if people will just be feeling, the hurt on their own end and they don't want to throw any more taxes to the government. Who knows?
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Or I guess whether sales tax would even make up the difference that they're hoping for, since the way that people are spending money is so different now. And for whatever the next version of normal is, we don't know what that spending looks like either.
Right. I mean, some of the experts I talked to really early on talked about how, whenever this ends, there will be like pent up, demand that should get unleashed,
like spending energy.
Yeah. Like people that have been putting off buying a car or something, like those sales have plummeted, and travel, right? Like, but depending on what it is, right? Given the health concerns that might remain and linger, or if we get hit with a bigger wave in the fall, which I know people have talked about, how long is it going to be like this, and will it be safe? So but to your point, 100%, right? Like a lot will depend on what things are like in the fall and whether they'll even reap the benefits that they had intended with that sales tax measure if it gets approved. So there's a lot of ifs between now and then, right? So.
Yeah. So in terms of the smaller cities in the region, is there anything else that you're paying attention to, like from now to the end of the year, in terms of how they're going to manage things, how they're going to fare through all this, or anything else?
So, I mean, we're paying attention to whether the state, coughs up any other direct dollars, although it doesn't look likely. We're going to pay attention to whether county supervisors will create a process, competitive or not, to access any of their dollars. And then obviously whether the feds will come around with any additional funding. Additionally, I'm personally keeping tabs on sort of the hit to pensions that the market had, both in the local pension systems, which would be San Diego and the county, but for all the smaller cities, it's usually CalPERS. Now, the impact of a single year is smoothed out, and especially from the state, they don't really calculate things until the end of the fiscal year, June 30th, and it'll have this trickle down effect though over the next several years. But we know, like even the county of San Diego with their pension fund, they're already beginning to calculate increased contributions that will be needed to make up for the huge economic losses that they saw with this pandemic. And so long term, there's that they'll have to come to terms with as well, when those have already been escalating and already been a major source of frustration and concern. Escondido in particular, that was one of the reasons they were putting forward the sales tax measure, they said. But now this pandemic has come, and so they're like, well, now the pandemic is at least as much of a problem as these pensions, but now pensions are going to get worse because of the market losses. So I'm paying attention to that too. And all sorts of other stuff. So.
Yeah, because for lots of years to come, I guess this is going to have a whole bunch of effects and repercussions on municipal budgets. So if anyone wants to keep following that, you can follow Ashley McGlone's work at voiceofsandiego.org. All of our great stuff is there. There was one to talk to you about before. So we at Voice of San Diego are preparing for an event next week that you're leading largely. We're going to be hosting it here on all these platforms where we're live streaming now. It's about schools and education in the time of coronavirus and staying at home. Can you talk a little bit about what the event's going to be?
Yeah, so Kayla Jimenez and I, some of you might know, but for the last almost 3 years, we've been sort of doggedly digging into cases of school sexual misconduct in the region's public school system. And we've found a lot of trends and information using the state's public records laws. But what was interesting was that the tide was starting to turn before all of this, and agencies were trying to ramp up their policies, kind of limiting contact between school employees and students on electronic media and social media and texting and emailing and stuff to make sure that those boundaries were appropriate and very clear. Well, fast forward and the pandemic has moved everything online. And so so much has changed that there are some advocates and even law enforcement that are concerned a bit about sort of these electronic communications that could happen between school employees and students as they work from home. And so there's a lot to consider, a lot to unpack, sort of best practices and some safeguards that are being put in place to try to nip any concerns in the bud, but also some warning signs that parents and students and even other teachers and such need to be aware of, and administrators. So we're going to bring together a really awesome group of stakeholders to kind of catch everyone up to speed on that. And it should be a really fun, informative event, as fun as school sexual misconduct can be, but it should be a good solid event. We've got school board member Richard Barrera, we've got district attorney Summer Steffen, we've got an awesome researcher Billy Joe Grant, and we're working on slotting in that fourth spot. But yeah, so it'll be Wednesday 5:00 right here on all the live streams, so it'll be good.
Join us right there in that low. So it'll be here. Follow Voice of San Diego on our site, voiceofsandiego.org, for all the things that Ashley's going to be covering in coming years, plus information on the event that's going to be happening on Wednesday. Our last event was really good, so you should probably check out this one as well. And we'll make it available so anyone who can't be there at the right time, you can watch it too, since it sounds like it'll be a really good conversation. I actually have some questions about that, but we'll get to that next week. So Ashley, thanks so much for joining us for Voice of San Diego at Home. Thanks everyone for watching. Make sure you're following Voice of San Diego on all your favorite social media platforms. We have a lot of really good stuff coming out in the coming weeks. And if you want to become a member or check out what's going on with our membership program, we have some cool events coming out this year. Go to voiceofsandiego.org/member. And thanks again. Ashley, I guess I'll see you on our next Zoom meeting, huh?
Sounds good. Tomorrow, no, not tomorrow morning, Monday morning.
Cool, sounds good.
Right. Bye.
Bye, everybody.